When I was in South Africa and I was uploading my content, I had a couple of colored people say, Anton, you would be considered colored in South Africa. Why do you always sort of like identify with the black South Africans? Why don't you come and identify with the colored South Africans? And you should learn Afrikaans because you're a colored brother.
How would you identify the term colored from your perspective?
Yeah. See, the easy definition would be people of mixed heritage, right? That's what people generally accept.
All right, everyone, welcome back to Anton's class. On today's episode, I wanted to jump into the whole Tyla controversy thing regarding her comments, apparently, about her racial categorization. And so I wanted to dive into this. Cheers to South Africa since we're discussing this topic. Sake. I'm just kidding. This is not sake. This is just water. Anyways, how are you guys doing? And what have you been up to? So, as someone who has studied anthropology in undergrad and someone who loves to learn about different cultures and travel, and I've been to South Africa. I'm not South African, all right? But I love South Africa. I've been there. I was in Joburg area, which I believe is where she happens to be from. Next time I go, I want to explore Cape Town. But anyways, you guys, let's go ahead and talk about this issue regarding race and culture and ethnicity, nationality, and unpack all these things. So I have this article pulled up here. It says, Tyla's racial identity. South African singer sparks culture war. Caught in a culture war, South Africa's hottest music sensation, Tyla, is in the crossfire of an online debate over the word she uses to describe her racial identity, colored. So, first of all, obviously, I'm American, I'm Black American, and the idea of race in America is different than race in other parts of the world. Why is that? Because race isn't real. It's a social construct. It's real in our heads in this matrix in which we all live and exist, right? But in ultimate reality, in biology and in science, race does not truly exist. There's one race, the human race, right? You could argue that there once were different races like the Neanderthal race, but there's only one race presently on the planet that is Homo sapiens sapiens, humans, right? We're all the same race. We are all the same race biologically. However, in our minds and how we perceive the world, there are different races socially and how we are brought up socially. That's why they say race is a social construct. And I've seen comments on YouTube videos and on Instagram posts that say, oh, Tyla's black. She's denying the fact that she's black, right? And if she comes to America, she has to embrace the American way. I'm sorry, that doesn't make any sense, you guys. She's not American, she's South African. That's like saying if you are a star and you're, let's say Beyonce. Beyonce is a famous American celebrity. When she goes and performs in Shanghai, she then has to learn and adopt all aspects of Chinese society and culture. No, that doesn't make any sense because she's international. Tyla goes to the Middle East. She was in Dubai. She goes to the US. She performs in Japan. She's not going to have to adopt the cultural norms just because she's going to perform or interview in those countries. So that makes no sense. So racial identity in America, we had the one drop rule, right? If you were mixed with black, you were therefore black, period. My mom's side of the family, if you uprooted her family tree and planted it in South Africa, she would be considered colored because she's multi-generationally mixed, meaning she's not biracial. One of her parents is black, one's white. Both of her parents were mixed. Her grandparents were mixed. Her great-grandparents were mixed going back many generations, kind of like Creoles in the American South. And some of her family was, in fact, Creole in like Louisiana, the South, around there. But in America, that's still black, right? So even though I am technically biologically or genetically mixed, I am completely African American, Black American. I do identify as part Japanese, but I'm still black. In America, that's just the way it is. That's the racial categorization. In South Africa, they didn't do it like that. They had white people who were the top of the racial hierarchy. Then you had the colored people, and then you had the indigenous black people at the bottom of the racial hierarchy in South Africa. Coloreds were their own distinct culture, right?
The colored people of South Africa are the most genetically mixed people in the world, with genetic heritage from the Bantu, Khoisan, Southeast Asian, European, and Middle Eastern.
So we see that colored folk came from an amalgamation of all kinds of different racial groups, right? Different ethnicities, I should say. And as a result, they became their own category, colored people. And again, Americans feel a sort of repulsion to that word because in America, that used to be the word we used to describe black people, right? And it's sort of an antiquated term. But in South Africa, it's not. It's literally a racial category, right? And so we have to understand that. You have to be educated. And people saying she's denying that she's black. Well, she's not black. In South Africa, she's not considered black, and she's South African. She is considered colored. This book is incredible by Trevor Noah. It's his autobiography, Born a Crime. Highly recommended. I love sci-fi and fantasy, but this autobiography was truly, honestly, like life-changing. It really gave me a deep perspective on South Africa. It's not just about race, but of course that does factor in, as he's a man who grew up in the apartheid era. And by the way, Trevor Noah is not colored. That's another misconception. Anyone who's biracial is colored. That's not true. He is of recent biracial extraction. His dad was European, I think like German or Swiss. And his mom was a Xhosa woman, and Trevor Noah was brought up Xhosa. He was not brought up by his father. He was brought up by his mother and his mother's family. Okay? So he is Xhosa for all intents and purposes. Yes, genetically he's half white, but culturally he is Xhosa. He's a black South African. He was raised black. He was not brought up as a colored person who comes from a multi-generational line of colored people. He is a black South African, and he's proud about that. Let me read this really quickly. It says, when apartheid came, colored people defied easy categorization. So the system used them quite brilliantly to sow confusion, hatred, and mistrust. For the purposes of the state, colored people became the almost whites. They were second-class citizens denied the rights of white people, but given special privileges that black people didn't have, just to keep them holding out for more. And it goes on to say that Afrikaners used to call them amperbas, which meant the almost boss. So you see, apartheid, as Trevor Noah brilliantly explains in his autobiography, was a system that was set up to truly subjugate black folk. They literally went around the world to study how to subjugate an entire population. They took racist practices from the Americas, from other parts of the world, to really create this system of strong racism. Anyways, the article goes on to say, before her rise to fame, the 21-year-old made a video proudly talking about her mixed race heritage on TikTok. In it, she slicks her coily hair into Bantu knots while donning a traditional beaded necklace with the words, "I am a colored South African," splashed across the clip like a badge of honor. And again, in America, that's not how we roll, but in South Africa, that's part of their history. Right? And it goes on to say, Americans see the word as a slur, unlike Tyla's South African community, who see it as a part of their culture. It is a distinct identity in South Africa, right? And then someone goes on to say she's trying to cross over into the American market. She won't be able to use that word here. She can use it somewhere else, though. You guys, again, like I said before, she's international. She's crossing over into the international market. She should not have to reject her identity just because she is now becoming an international celebrity. No, actually, this should be a grand opportunity for education. People need to become educated on the topic of race when it comes to other parts of the world. That's like, for example, there are what we would consider black Middle Eastern people in Oman, in Kuwait, in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, all over the Middle East, honestly, right? Especially in this Arabian Peninsula. They are black people who are indigenous now to the Arabian Peninsula. But if they came here, they would have to, I guess, identify as black. But in the Middle East, that's not necessarily their racial identity because they're not American. So if a celebrity comes here and they ask him, what are you? And he says, I'm Middle Eastern. Are people going to be upset? We need to start being educated on different cultures, right? Because since race isn't real, it's just a social construct. It is a cultural construct. So again, Tyla is not black. She is colored. I repeat, Tyla is not black. She's colored. And also in the United States, now we're finally opening up to the idea of rejecting the one-drop rule. Just because someone's mixed with black does not mean they have to identify as black exclusively, okay? There are mixed people who don't have to identify as black. For example, there were Creoles. There was this controversy because Creole people were saying that they were Creole. And a lot of black folks were saying, no, she needs to identify as black. Beyonce, for example, her mother's Creole. And so people were saying that Creoles, it brought up the conversation about Creoles and whether or not Creoles should have to identify as black. Well, I am of the camp that they could identify as whatever they want to. They are mixed. To me, if you're mixed and you have both cultures, that's fair and that's fine. If you're mixed with white, you don't get to identify as white. You can identify as part white, but you never, if you're half black and half white, you will never be able to identify as white. If you're half black and half Chinese, you will never be able to identify as Chinese. Black people are like the only people where even if you're just a quarter black, you get to identify as black. It's because of the one-drop rule, folks. It's because of the one-drop rule. Anyways, you guys, South Africans, I want to know your experience in the comments about this topic. By the way, one more thing. When I was in South Africa and I was uploading my content, I had a couple of colored people say, Anton, you would be considered colored in South Africa. Why do you always sort of like identify with the black South Africans? Why don't you come and identify with the colored South Africans? And you should learn Afrikaans because you're a colored brother. In Namibia, I had a colored person speak to me in Afrikaans, and he was shocked when I told him I was not Namibian. He was disappointed when I didn't respond in Afrikaans, and he was like, why don't you speak Afrikaans, brother? And I was like, well, I'm American. Anyways, you guys, I don't identify, well, naturally, I don't identify as colored. I'm a black American. But even if I go to South Africa, when I see black people, for example, other black people in South Africa, in the mall, in the grocery stores, I feel so at ease and I feel at home. Okay. When I walk into, let's say, what is it called? When I walk into Pep, or when I walk into Mr. Price, or when I walk into Food Lovers Market, which was my favorite store in South Africa and Namibia, and I see all these black people walking around, I'm like, yes, I feel comfortable. I feel at home. Not to say I don't feel comfortable with other groups of people, but I just feel like I'm home with my family, right? When I walk and I see a lot of black South Africans. Even though I don't speak isiZulu or isiXhosa, and when I hear those languages, it just makes me feel really good. And I love that they're speaking their languages. And if I go to South Africa and if I happen to like retire there or something, I want to learn Zulu. I love all people. I love the colored folk. And I would love to learn more about your culture down there in South Africa. But personally, even though I'm mixed, I would not identify as colored in South Africa. For example, when I went to the doctor one time in South Africa and they asked me like to fill out the paperwork and what was my race, I said black African. I said black and they put black African. I wasn't going to say color. Color was on there as an option. White, Indian, South Asian, East Asian. I was black and that's what I put. I am black. Anyways, you guys, I want to know, I know this is a potentially very sensitive and controversial issue, but I wanted to offer my opinion. And so let's please be respectful in the comments. Anyways, you guys, thank you so much for stopping by Anton's class. If you got anything from this video whatsoever, please hit the like button. I really would appreciate that. If I left anything out or if you disagree, let's disagree respectfully. And if you have any constructive criticism, that is always welcome. Thank you so much for stopping by Anton's class. Until next time, bye.